Welcome to the Collecting the Past podcast. Funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and in partnership with the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities, this project paired students from Georgia College with community members to collect oral histories from individuals who either lived in Milledgeville during the heart of O'Connor's writing career or whose lives were shaped by events that took place during this period. Our goals with the project are to expand the existing historical narrative of our town by documenting unwritten life stories and creating a public digital archive. As you'll hear, the students had fun creating their own podcasts in the style of their choice. Like our narrators, each episode has its own personality.
My name is Victoria Riva. I'm here with Dr. Lee here, and we are doing an interview today on her life and her experiences in Milledgeville, and we're doing this meeting on Zoom today. So I guess we could start out. Could you describe where you were born and your family background a little bit?
So I was born in Waycross, Georgia, which is where my mother grew up. And my father was in the war. He was, let's see, he was training, he was teaching navigation in the Navy and the Pacific. And so my mother was staying with her parents. And she was one of six children, and um, her father was a real estate developer. And so um, what else can I tell you about that or anything?
Do you have a favorite childhood memory that you think describes your childhood?
Well, my grandfather, who we call Buddy, was he loved children. He just adored children, and family was very important to him. And so um, he had 15 grandchildren, and I always felt I was the favorite, but he loved each and every one. But when I was growing up, and we would visit a lot, even after my father came back, um, my grandfather at Christmas he wanted all his kids and grandkids to come home, and um, we uh, we would do that. But I always had trouble sleeping, and as a kid, as an adult. But anyway, he didn't sleep well either. So I knew if I couldn't get to sleep, I would go down and find him in the study with all the books on the sides of the walls and a big fire going, and I could help him go around and put coal in the fireplaces in the bedrooms. It was a big house, and then he liked to eat fried cheese in like a pan, and we'd have a snack in the kitchen, and then he'd rock me in front of the fire, and we would often peel oranges. And so yeah, I mean that's just like an example of what it was like to grow up in that extended family. Very warm, very um, you just felt very loved uh, and kind of gathered in.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'm really close with my grandfather as well. They live probably 10 minutes from my house, so I go over there all the time. Um, so I have a similar experience with that.
Mhm.
Could you tell me what your parents' careers were and how this like impacted yours?
Um, well, my mother majored in mathematics, which is fairly unusual for women back then. Still is, I suppose. And she got a job with the Tennessee Valley Authority, um, helping to make maps. And she was really good at what she did, and they offered to send her to engineering school. But she said, "Nope, I think I want to get married and have a family." And so she eventually moved back to Waycross and got a job in her dad's office. And my dad he did a master's in mathematics, and became a professor. But of course, he had to go into the war for a while and teach. And then when he came back, he pursued a PhD in education, concentrating in statistics. So when he finished his PhD, he first worked for the state of Florida in Tallahassee for maybe 3 or 4 years. More helping do research for the Department of Education. And then he got his first teaching job at Berry College in near Rome, Georgia. And then he became a dean there, and then he applied for the job as president of Georgia College and was there for 11 years. And then he went back to teaching mathematics for the last part of his career. But his career was in education as a teacher, as an administrator. And and my mother was happy to just be at home with 3 kids. She wanted to have 6, but couldn't do that after a few cesareans. But she was a mover and shaker. She in these days she would have been a paid assistant to the president, because she would plan events, orchestrate events, host all kinds of guests to spend the night at the mansion where I grew up. But she was very active in the community, a very go-getter person. Yeah.
Did you ever help her with like planning those events for the schools and things?
No, I really I mean, I wasn't very close to her when I was growing up. I really wanted I sort of knew right away I didn't want to have children. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want a life of sacrifice for others. Very ironic that what I actually did, but but at that time, when I was growing up, it was like, no, I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be. I didn't want to learn. She was a wonderful cook. She was a gregarious person who people really loved. And I mean, she was a good mother, but I didn't want to be like her. I was closer to my dad in that sense, and sort of thought, well, maybe but I didn't want to be a teacher because that's what girls did. I didn't want to be a teacher, nurse, social worker, or do anything that was a female-oriented career. I didn't want to babysit, forget it.
And you mentioned your dad was the dean of Georgia College,
He was the president.
or president. Where did y'all live when you were
We
here?
lived in the mansion from 1956 to 67.
Oh, like in the governor's mansion?
Yeah, it was the president's home at that time.
Yeah, I do remember learning about that because I really like going through that museum. I've gone a couple times. They're like, you again? I'm like, yeah, I just like looking at it. Um, what memories do you have of living in that house? Was there any creepy occurrences with that?
Well, we just thought it was a hoot, to live in a place like that. There was a secret staircase. There was a secret tunnel that was supposed to have one time led to the um, government buildings that were now at GMC, and that there's a place underneath the front stairs that you can see there could have been a tunnel there. In fact, the governor was supposed to have tried to escape there when the army came to basically take over Georgia during the Civil War. But yeah, it was just a playground for kids. I had 2 younger brothers, and we turned the bottom ballroom into a ping pong table, pool table, and shuffleboard court. And my mother put in a industrial sized ice cream freezer so that we could just get those big bins of round different kinds of ice cream, and she would keep cones and people could just dip ice cream coming over to play. So we were the center of the neighborhood for the neighborhood kids to come and play. And it was I mean, yeah, it wasn't creepy in that I don't ever remember being spooked. But back in those days, the second floor bedroom was used as a guest room for college guests. And I do remember once as a teenager, I was studying piano pretty seriously, so I practiced an hour before school every day, basically from 6 to 7. And sometimes when I would be practicing, I would need to use the bathroom, and I would use the bathroom in that guest bedroom. And I went in there and realized there was a guest. And of course, he was pretty shocked too. I don't know why he wouldn't have been waked up by my playing the piano, but in the ballroom up there on the second floor, must have been loud. But the doors could have been shut. Maybe he was a heavy sleeper, but they started having the events. My mother was the first one to say, let's put in a big Christmas tree in the rotunda and decorate it all the way up. And she was very innovative in ways of entertaining, and so it was just really fun. It was not in good shape though. It was kind of run down, and plaster would fall down, or a chandelier would start to hang, and the radiators didn't work so well. But um, it was kind of idyllic place to grow up in because you couldn't hurt anything. It was just kind of run down anyway. So,
Yeah, that's cool. Did you get to learn like the history of it when you were living there, or did you not really connect that as a
um,
kid, I guess?
a bit, but I think the history we heard was pretty patched together. We heard stories about how it was turned into a hospital during the war, and so there were some marble fireplace that fronts that had carved initials in it that were supposedly from people in the war and soldiers in the war. And then after the war, yeah, I think it was used as a dorm for the college for some years. And so we would those were the kind of things we heard about in terms of history. When I look back, I mean, it never occurred to me when I lived in there that the mansion was probably built by slaves. And I don't think I had a deep appreciation growing up how what an incredibly uh, well I grew up in an apartheid state, growing up in the South in the 50s and 60s, and there was just horrible things that happened in Milledgeville that and I went on to be part of the civil rights movement when I was at Duke University. But even though I did that, I don't think I really understood the the bigger picture at that time. Even though my parents were very determined that my brothers and me grow up without prejudice in this sort of, when I was 4, I think I was in kindergarten, and someone that came home and said the N word, and my mother took me to the bathroom and made me wash my mouth out with soap. And I didn't understand what the word was. I just heard somebody using it, but I never used it again. And they were quite adamant about that they both were quite open-minded liberal people. I don't know how that happened, but they talked about wanting us. And so we would discuss, demonstrations and marches at the breakfast table, and sometimes the cook, Olivia, would chime in, and there was always a sense of that they cared a lot about justice and equality and treating people fairly. So those weren't just my views. I was basically learning from them, and I appreciate that they did that. But still, you just don't. Oh, I also heard the story about the Ku Klux Klan that burned a cross in front of the house um, when Dr. Wells was president, and that was spooky. Yeah, that was spooky. But I never felt personally afraid of being in the Black community or or it was clear that this was Jim Crow, that they knew their place and they were staying in it. There was never any fear. Although when I got in the civil rights movement, I got into situations where there were doing voter registration, participating in the sit-ins and things where I did feel and I did see a lot of violence. But in Milledgeville, no, no.
That kind of surprises me. That's really brave that your parents were had those views, I think, in a place like Milledgeville, deep in the South like that. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with him. We had a guest speaker a couple of weeks ago. His name is Dr. Bob Wilson. He was like the Georgia College historian, I guess.
Yeah,
But he
I
was
know
kind of
Bob.
talking about the some of the stuff he said, like the tunnel from the house, and he was saying that they've never really found anything to confirm or deny it yet. But that's kind of interesting that he was talking about that too.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and he was also saying like how all of the stuff from like Jim Crow is very like hidden. It's still here because we were talking about the bookstore. I don't know how recently you've been back here, but the old theater downtown was turned into like Barnes and Noble bookstore.
yeah,
But you can see there's a little door to the side, and he said y'all probably don't notice that, but that was for the African American guests of the theater to go up and sit at the very top.
yeah. I remember that.
Did you
Yeah.
ever go to that theater? I'm not sure
Oh,
what.
yeah. That was
Oh,
very
you
popular teenage haunt, and my father wouldn't let me go in a car with a boy till I was, I don't know, maybe 17 or 18. Anyway, he didn't trust teenage boys behind the wheel, both as drivers and as men, I guess. But so we walked everywhere. So, it was easy being in the mansion. I mean, we would walk to the movies, and it was a favorite ice cream place. I can't remember exactly where that was, but one of the things I remember talking about these stories, the cook, Olivia, who eventually became like a tour guide at the mansion as a museum. Um, her husband was a painter, and very had a very stable job, and at a certain point they saved enough money to buy a small house rather than rent this little shack. And they couldn't get a mortgage. None of the banks would give them a mortgage, in spite of the fact that both of them had very stable jobs and had a good amount of money and so forth. And my mother was just totally shocked, like, what do you mean? You've got the money? That's racist. That's like, you can't say you can't have. And so she said, well, I know my friend, I don't want to use any names here, but he's president of one of the big banks. She said, I'm going to talk to him. And Olivia said, well, he's the one I talked to. He's not going to do it. But my mother went and talked to him anyway, and he said, no way, no way. And my mother then said to Olivia, I'm going to take out a mortgage on your behalf. And Olivia didn't like that at all, because it was like, it was paternalistic. It was, it didn't feel right to her. But my mother just said, look, I want to do this for you. It's not like my money. You're giving me the money to do it for you. And it's the society we're in. She finally let my mother do it. And they had a house just down the street on Clark Avenue. Beautiful house. But that's just an example. And even though my parents were very central people in the community, and went to church, and they could only go so far because there were so many people with other views on the subject.
Did you experience all that racism in school growing up? I guess when you were younger here.
Well, it was an all-white school system then, right? I mean, there was the black schools and the white schools, period. And so I was gone before they had the desegregation and the sort of joining of the schools. But some of my mother's best friends were on the committee for planning the desegregation process. Things have changed tremendously compared to when I was there. And I did have so when I think I skipped a grade in high school. I went from sixth to eighth grade, and eighth was when you started high school. And well, I don't know. Stop me if you don't want me to talk about this. There are other things to talk about, but
No, keep going.
in the eighth grade, you had to take civics, and there was a debate on the poll tax, which was still in place at that time. The poll tax was a tax only on Black voters that was intended to, discourage them to vote. And so people were given. Uh, people were assigned a topic and then a pro and a con position, and then we had a debate in front of the class. And I got the con side of poll tax, and Jim Tate, whose mother taught at the college in English, got the other side, and he was a very good public speaker, I have to say. And it got really heated in the um, classroom. And I mean, I think I did as good a job as I could, but it was clear people thought he was right, and he won the debate. I mean, we didn't have a formal winning or losing. But after in the halls, I was changing books in my locker, and some girls walked by and called me an in lover and kind of bumped into me like this, And I don't know, I just flipped, and I turned around and I grabbed her hair, and we fought on the floor in the halls of Baldwin County High School. And she ripped my blouse. I think I ripped significant hair out of her. And I wasn't a pugnacious kid at all, but oh man, and I didn't know I had it in me to do that. But then I just walked out the front door, and came home to the mansion because I was very upset, and I was crying and stuff. And the incident, I mean, everyone gathered around, right? Teachers came out, all the students. I was never called into the office. The other girl was never, it was nothing happened.
Is that kind of a moment you think led you into participating in the civil rights
I,
movement?
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. There were other things too, like um, there was something in particular. Oh, no, that came later. But I think I always had a sense of being affected by the situation of the underdog, and there were movies I would cry in that no one else would, but because I just felt horrible about the bad things happening to someone, and that it should get fixed, and it should get helped. And a lot of people in my class said, "Oh, you're going to be a social worker, Mary Jean. You're always got a bleeding heart for the underdog." And I think that's probably true, but I was starting to really read the newspapers and follow the civil rights movement, and of course the 1954 Supreme Court decision that schools would no longer be able to be separate but equal, because that's not the way it was. Anyway, oh, I know what I was going to say. So then I joined the basketball team, and I was still playing the piano, but I wasn't into school at all. I made straight A's, but a couple of B's, but I just, my heart wasn't in it. I loved playing basketball and I loved doing piano, but uh, and then when I was finishing up the 11th grade, I had a basketball accident and I broke my ankle, so I couldn't play. And then I guess I was brooding around and stuff, and then there was a lot of talk about Lester Maddox was governor, and he was talking about closing schools in September rather than desegregating. And it was going to be my senior year. And so my mother said, I think we should look at a prep school for you, because um, um, you don't want to miss your senior year. But I think she was also feeling like I wasn't being stimulated anymore in school, and that it would be good for me just in general to get out and meet different people and stuff. So, um, so I got into this really good prep school called Northfield School for Girls. It's been co-ed now a long time, but back then the brother school was across the river. So it was like we did a lot of activities together, but the classes were separate. And they wouldn't take you just for 1 year, like the senior year only. I had to go for 2. But they said you won't have to repeat anything. We'll just give you more advanced courses, and then you'll be the right age to go to college. So I said, okay. And but that was really mind-boggling, because the president of the student body was this young Black girl from Alabama named Diane Kinney. And here I am living in a place where people don't even go to the same school, and she's got incredible leadership talent. And then I became president of the student body the next year. It was a real blossoming intellectually for me to be in that school. And there was a whole group of kids interested in the civil rights movement, and I would hang out with them and learn a lot about it, to the point that when it came my senior year, I didn't really want to go to college. I wanted to work full time in the movement. And my my parents were not happy with that. They supported my, views, and then I remember my dad and I sitting down and having a confrontation. I don't know, maybe it was at Thanksgiving of my senior year, and he said, "Look, why don't you work in the civil rights movement on a college campus?" And um, and I ended up deciding to apply to Duke University because it was in the South. I didn't want to be in the North. I wanted to go back where you know, the problem was really big. And I said, okay, I'll apply to Duke University, early decision. It's the only place I'm applying. If I get in, I will go for 2 years. And then if I want to quit and do whatever else, you won't say a word. We shook hands on it. It was like, okay. And so that's what happened. So yeah, my late teenage years and during that whole time were shaped a great deal by my beliefs and my passion about that issue. And but and then when came home for Christmas, my freshman year at Duke, I had been voted chair of CORE on campus. It was the Congress of Racial Equality. It was a small group of students. It was the first year Duke integrated, so they accepted 5 students out of 1,000, that year. But I came home and I felt like, I don't even know a Black person in Milledgeville other than the cook, house cleaner, and gardener for, for the mansion. So I got Olivia, the cook, I said, you got to introduce me. I want to, want to feel like I'm connected. It's like 45% of the population here, and I'm living in only one part of it. So I met the daughter of the head of the NAACP in Milledgeville. Her name was Connie Brown, and we became really fast friends. But she was older. She was like maybe late 20s when I was late teens. But that friendship lasted a long time, and I met her father and her whole family, and she had two young children. She was divorced. Um, but all of that part of my life came to an end when my younger brother, Bill, at 17, he was at Princeton, had a car crash where he had sustained massive brain damage. And he was had to be in the hospital or with round-the-clock nursing care at the mansion or at home for the rest of his life. And there was, I mean, I don't want to go into the details of his situation, but his brain was damaged in such a way that they said he was understanding everything around him, but he could not. It's called locked-in brain syndrome, but he could not respond and he couldn't feed himself. But he was in a program that was very experimental and controversial, but basically my family's life turned into trying to keep him alive and maybe give him a chance to come back. So that was it was sort of like I was going along on this stream and then yeah. But
Something happened to him. I'm in a very similar thing. My mom has had about, she's had 2 open heart surgeries and 6 strokes. So she needs a lot of care too. So totally understand where you're coming from with that.
yeah, it's so but I mean I think that whole stream of my time in Milledgeville was I didn't get involved in other things when I was after college that had similar aspects, and I actually taught in the Philadelphia in the ghetto as a substitute teacher for a while, and um, joined the teacher corps in Philadelphia, which was for uh, to try to help communities that the sort of ghetto communities, Black communities in the States. But I think uh, my years in Milledgeville were very much affected by what was going on in the society at that time. But I have to say, I had a wonderful, loving family and I was close to both my younger brothers, crazy about them, and even though we fought. And Milledgeville was it was a good community to grow up in. There were lots of things to do. We used to play. I was with a group of kids that were faculty kids. Um, it was like our big playground, and we play kick the can and steal the flag. We would have these like roller skating parties on campus, and we'd play tennis, basketball. It was um, yeah, and it just gave you a natural. Oh, and our parents decided 1 year or 2 years to teach us how to play bridge on Saturdays, and different parents would give us lessons on different Saturdays at different houses. And of course, sometimes we didn't take it seriously at all. We were cheating and showing our hands like this instead of trying to learn how to bid. But you just had plenty of friends and people to have fun with. And I look back on that and I think our kids um, growing up in Montreal didn't have that kind of community that uh, that I wish they had because it was good for me.
Did you ever consider going to Georgia College, or was that like too close to like what your family did?
It was like, no way, no way. I mean, and it wasn't because I had good relationships with some of the profs there, and one of them in particular, Dean McMahon, helped me learn to write a good essay, and I studied piano with Maribel Benton, who was a really fine musician and teacher, and yeah, I knew a lot of the faculty well, and my father was very excited about the mission of educating young women. It was, but it was, you have to get away from home. You know, you don't want to stay in the circle. You have to become your own person. And once I went away to prep school, I'm not going back. I want to go out in the world and discover things and experience things. So,
I was the same. That was me with Kennesaw State. I'm from Woodstock, so that's like 10 minutes away from my house. So I was like, nope, not going there, Mom. Sorry. So I'm a little further away, about 2.5 hours. So that's close but far at the same time, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
Did your family go to church in Milledgeville anywhere?
We went to the First Presbyterian, and yeah, my dad was an elder. My mother taught Sunday school. I think my father taught Sunday school too. And we had a, you know, youth fellowship on Sunday nights. And I think I sang in the choir. And yeah, it was a big part of our lives. Yeah.
And were y'all involved in like any businesses or places you went to downtown Milledgeville? Because I know this is kind of random fact that I don't know the history on it. I work downtown at a restaurant now. It's called Real Girl, but it used to be a bank before because we have like a bank vault now that's still in there that has little seats that people can sit in there. It's kind of cool. But I think I've heard it was called the Milledgeville Banking Company, so I didn't know if that was around when you lived there. I'm not really sure.
I don't think that was, I think we used the Exchange Bank. I don't know if it's still there, but you know, some of my friends had a father who was a pharmacist, and uh, I don't remember any other real business people. I mean, of course, Flannery O'Connor um, aunt lived right behind the mansion, and so we saw her, and she became good friends with my father's sister, Marriott Lee, who was a writer from New York, and so I went out to some readings and stuff at Andalusia, but businesses, I can't remember any other ones that there was a guy named Mark. Oh, there was I had two friends named Mark and Eileen Hodges, and their father owned a big company, but I don't even know what they did. And then the textile mill that was sort of out of town, run by the CEO, was John Baum, Baum, and he and my father became good friends, and actually his company offered their plane to fly my brother up to Philadelphia for a consult with this special hospital for brain damaged adolescents. So there were things like that, but mm, I think most of our relationships and friendships, and my parents too, were with college people, faculty and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said you went to Andalusia. What was your first experience there?
Well, I think when I went there, it was because my aunt my aunt Marriott was I think she met I think she and Flannery met maybe the first or second Christmas we after we moved to Milledgeville, and because they were both writers, um, um, I don't know who took the initiative, but then they became really close friends. And um, so when Marriott would come to town, she would sometimes say to me, do you want to come? Because there's going to be a reading, some um, college students will be there, and you can just listen in, or if you want. And I mean, I was young. I was 14, 13, 14, 15, but I just remember there was this wonderful atmosphere of kind of excitement about her uh, her writing and what she was trying to say, and uh, it was something like I'd never experienced. So I was very intrigued by it. But then once I began to read Flannery O'Connor, of course, it's a very disturbing language and kind of portrayal of the South. And I don't know, um, it's hard to take that language to read it. And so I've been through different phases in my life, but she was I mean, she and my aunt they were both wonderful examples of sort of rebels who were not going to grow up to be, sedate and gracious women serving tea, iced tea in the backyard. And, they were going to do their own thing. And I resonated with that. And Marriott was, she wanted to be my role model, and she was in a way. I mean, if you don't want to be like your mother and become a wife and mother and school teacher or nurse, where do you find a role model? Well, she was in the theater in New York. She was a bohemian. She was 6 feet tall and wore these outrageous clothes. And I just thought, wow, But, the more I visited her in New York and saw her life, I saw her struggles, and I saw her um, and I wasn't sure anymore. I wanted to be like her. I I wanted to be who I was going to be, and then later, I guess, yeah, during college and after, she and I had a break, a breaking point where we really had a big disagreement, and I said, get away. So Flannery was all part of that because they were friends, but Flannery, the book about letters, Flannery's letters, has a lot of letters between Marriott and Flannery, and there's a lot of talk about my father and me and our family in there because there was that friendship between the families, and then the Regina lived right next door, not Regina because that was her mother, but her sister, I forget her name, lived right next door, and we would see them in the backyard. And so it was um, it was an influence, but um, not a major one. There were too many other things going on for me. Yeah.
Yeah, we had to read some of her work for this class, and it was really hard for me to understand a little bit. I like books, but I was like, I would have to go read it a couple times because I was like, wait, what is going on here?
Yeah, exactly,
But I think
exactly.
it is really interesting. We toured her Andalusia, and that was really cool. Did you get to see like the peacocks that she had and all
Oh
that?
yeah, oh yeah. And I mean, when I was there, it was still a working farm, and you know,
Yeah, we got to learn a lot about Regina too in this class because everyone kind of talks about Flannery, but then Dr. Opperman was saying how Regina was such an influential part of the community because she was the one out there dealing with the farm and all that. So, did you see more of Regina than Flannery, you would say?
no. And Regina and Marriott, my aunt, did not get along because Regina saw her as a threat, kind of. Marriott kept saying, "You got to get out of this place." come back to New York. And Flannery had spent some time in New York. And my aunt was, she was brazen. She would do things that weren't really acceptable. Like she'd fly into Atlanta and ask the yard man to drive up and pick her up. Well, you can't do that. You can't have a black man driving where she sits in the front seat. That was just a no-no. But she would, and my father would say, "Now, Marriott, you're in the South. Just you've got to accommodate the customs." And my Marriott would like roll her eyes, and she would try, but she wasn't very. You never knew what she might do. Is the way I think she felt.
I know with Flannery, she wrote a lot of her characters kind of based on allegedly like her mom and the people around her. Do you ever like wonder if your aunt was like based on one of those characters she made?
Yeah, I think that the one Revelation, I think is a story that there's a lot of just articles that have been written about it, but um I mean that is one of my favorite stories, Revelation, that she wrote. And there's it's a doctor's office, and there's this mother who brings a daughter in who's really kind of just loses it in the doctor's office, and often there have been articles written that character was sort of shaped around Marriott and what she was like. And um, I think she was going away to college at Wellesley or someplace like that, which was where Marriott went to university. And um, but Marriott was bugged by the fact that Flannery didn't take a stand on racial issues. Like she just wrote about what the South was like and what white people said about black people. And she didn't. And Marriott thought that was wrong. She thought that she should really. And they thought about it. I mean, I heard them talking about some of these issues, but of course, Regina, she didn't want Marriott to influence Flannery. So that was, but Flannery took a pretty hard line, like, I'm a writer, I'm not an activist. I'm a writer, and that's what I do well, and that's what I'm going to continue to try to do. Write about what I see, what I know, which is legit in my view. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think your perception of her changed like once you moved away from Milledgeville?
Of Marriott or
Or
Flannery, both.
Flannery or both, either one?
Yeah, I think so. I think I saw them as brave women who were out, you know, pursuing careers and that weren't, traditional careers for women. And then I saw them as, that wasn't for me. I wanted, I didn't, and I thought I wanted to be a writer when I was, so it's very ironic that now I've become a poet and my first book is coming out and all that, but I I really wanted to find my own way, and it was more like just, give me some space here. Um, but Flannery and I were never personally close. I mean, she was not very social person in general. She was not easy to kind of, she and Marriott they just clicked. But she didn't necessarily take an interest in me or anybody. And she was pretty ill when I met her already with lupus, and so um, yeah.
I know I was gonna bring up about how your book and like poetry, would you say any of it was inspired by Milledgeville or like references Milledgeville?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the poems I recently published that's not in the book. It's called Southern Belle, and it's in the mansion. It's a description of the mansion when I grew up in it. But I didn't put it in the book for a lot of reasons. But there's one called Driving Lessons, Baldwin County, Georgia, that's very much my father teaching me to drive back then, and there's my first boyfriend is in there. What's his name? What was his name? No, I remember his name well, but what's oh, it's called something like um, Plowboy, oh, or maybe I changed it, but it's a title about this hangout where we went, the hamburger milkshake place in town that everybody went to, and there's some other poems that I think of course once my brother had his accident, my whole that was 1964, and we left Milledgeville in 67, so it was toward the end of our years there. But there's quite a lot in the book about a lot of poems about his accident and about what he was like before the accident, and kind of what it did to the family. So Milledgeville is in there. Yeah, I thought about having a reading there, but a launch and a reading at the bookstore, the college bookstore or something, but I decided not to because I don't really have many friends there anymore, and I don't feel a connection except through John Sahlstrom. I got to know a few years ago, and then there was a very close friend named Dee Fuller, married to Kathy McLean Fuller, and I was close to them, but Dee died in 2022. I mean, Baldwin County high school has tried to get me to come back for reunions, but since I didn't graduate from there, I don't feel as attached, and haven't kept up those relationships. So I probably won't do a reading in Milledgeville, but for sure there are poems based on my life there, and poems are not necessarily true or mostly true, but sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not at all. But yeah, I think Bob Wilson heard about the book and has asked me to send him a copy, so I will.
Yeah, he was a really smart guy. I really liked him.
Yeah, he's
Um,
nice.
have you been back to Milledgeville since you left or not at all?
Yeah, a few times. I brought my kids there when Olivia was still alive because I stayed close to her, and then and my father would visit too, even after my mother died. And then the first renovation of the mansion, we were invited, our whole family was invited back, and my father and my brother and I came. And then the second renovation, we maybe came again. And then there was a honoring of my dad's presidency in 2020, right before COVID hit, and naming a room after him. And so I was there for that, and then I was interviewed for one of the movies of documentaries about Flannery, and I met the filmmakers at Andalusia for that, and then I was telling them about this painting that my aunt did of a Black Christ on the cross, and I decided I wanted to find the painting because I really liked it. So Dee Fuller and Kathy Fuller and John Sahlstrom all helped me find that painting. And so then I became close to the people at that church. And but I haven't, like I would say, since 2000, maybe my dad died in 2015. I guess 2017, 18, and then 20. I think I came back once each time, and it really had to do with wanting to track down that painting, and then the college honoring my father in 2020. And no, last summer I went to see Dee's widow, Kathy, and she was a close friend of my parents as well. And she didn't grow up in Milledgeville, but because she was married to one of my closest friends, Dee Fuller, and his father was Donald Fuller, who was in the business department at the college. I went to see her after Dee died, and so I don't know. But as far as my friends from school, they're just not there. I did become friendly with Dan Lavery in the alumni office around this whole honoring of my father, and my whole family came for that event, and we were invited to have a luncheon at the mansion in the downstairs ballroom, which was great. And they took us through a tour, and we heard all the correct, historical background. My brother and his 3 kids were there, and some of them brought their children, so kind of hearing about the family, and as they took us through the house, the poor tour guide got off track as we were telling stories. Oh, we used to use this as a sliding board, and we used to. But it was fun. It was fun, and the president then was really nice to us. I forget his name now, but
Was it Dorman? I think it was President Dorman.
yeah, Dorman. Yeah.
Because I came in 2020. That was my freshman year. So that's funny. Maybe I walked past you then.
Maybe. He was very welcoming and very gracious with our whole family, and I think we appreciated um, the event, yeah, very much.
Would you ever consider moving back to Milledgeville, or you think not?
So, no, I think my family in South Georgia, Waycross, has a cottage on St. Simon's Island that is now owned by 28 of the cousins whose parents were my mother's siblings. And so I go back there every year a couple of times. And sometimes I do a writing retreat down there. But and I have a couple of friends who live other places now, and I see them different occasions. But when I go to Milledgeville, I feel this sense of, oh, it's pretty different from when I was there. And my husband is a professor too, and we go back to his father was a university chaplain, and he got in fact invited to take an interview for a position back as an economics prof there. But you go, and after you've lived in Montreal or a big city, going back to a small town just feels really small, and like maybe too many people know your business, which it was hard growing up as the president's kids, because as soon as you did anything wrong, or everybody knew. It was just that gossip thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. Woodstock's closer to Atlanta. I just say I'm from Atlanta, but coming here, it was a lot different for me. And going
Yeah,
back home over the summer, I'm like, oh yeah, this is so much bigger than I realized.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to share about Milledgeville or your time?
I guess the only other thing that strikes me is that, of course, in a small college town like that, there's a tremendous a lot of the faculty spouses were teaching in the high school, and so I felt like the education was super good, and that even though I wasn't very motivated intellectually, like I just didn't get turned on to working hard and stuff, that there was an ambiance, there was an intellectual, and well, part of it was we kept entertaining faculty. Almost every other weekend there was something at the house. And there would be spirited debates and conversations at the table about all kinds of issues. It might be about art or Flannery's latest story or the demonstration in Alabama last week, and people were engaged with ideas and with kind of issues, and it was very exciting to grow up in that kind of atmosphere where I don't think my kids had that same experience for sure. I was just a prof, I wasn't a dean or anything like that, and they didn't have that advantage. I think I did, and I appreciated it. I also gave a number of concerts in that ballroom on the second floor on the Steinway Baby Grand, and how many people think you're crazy if you talk about that kind of stuff, because it's not like we had a lot of money. We just happened to grow up in this house that was like fairy tale, and you had experiences that were beyond maybe what you would have had in a normal growing up. Yeah.
Was it weird to go back after the renovations and like see your room totally changed?
Heartbreaking, really, very hard. Yeah. Yeah. And you try to explain to your kids, well, those 3 rooms used to be my room, and I used to sit in the windowsills and look at the sunset, and well, they look at me like I'm nuts.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with me. That was really, really interesting. You were a great narrator.
We hope you enjoyed learning more about the people and historical events connected to Milledgeville and Flannery O'Connor in this episode. If you or someone you know has stories to share related to either of these topics, we'd love to hear them. In addition to documenting community memories, you'll also help us preserve your story for future generations. Visit our website, collectingthepastmilledgeville.wordpress.com, to learn more.